So I've got to tell you guys a little bit of something about staying over at the Kellett household.
Okay, here we go.
Oh man, if you ever get a chance to be a house guest, first of all, in all seriousness, Dave and Gloria are fantastic hosts. I had a really great time staying there.
Here comes the hammer. I've known you long enough. Here comes the hammer.
But oh boy, if you ever get a chance to have Dave make you breakfast, I've eaten at a lot of places. I've never been.
Oh no! Wait.
And by the way, Jake Parker was there. Jake, we were both sitting there, and Dave offers to make breakfast, and I was actually offered a half a pancake. He's making the pancakes for the kids and everything, and he says, and Brad, if you'd like, I'll make a half a pancake for you or whatever you want. And I'm like, really, a whole half a pancake? That's that's what I'm getting for breakfast over here. And Jake and I just start riffing mercilessly. And I'm like, Jake at one point says, I actually think that I could actually eat maybe 4 halves of a pancake.
Oh, God.
I got offered a half a flapjack. Holy cats. I didn't know what I was going to do with myself.
Brad, I'm a big proponent of letting the bounty flow. Just the harvest basket overflowing. Everyone gets a third of a pancake. It's Did you get the quarters of blueberries that I gave you?
I did. Oh my God, the quarters of blueberries were. I mean, imagine me coming from the Midwest. I thought he said a quart of blueberries. Turns out it was a quarter of a blueberry. And boy, was I stuffed coming home. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, you're pushing back from the table, going. You have to loosen the belt. You're really.
Yeah. You know how raspberries are made up of all those real small berries? I've never seen one of those on a plate.
See, the pancake thing is that's a welcome to Los Angeles. That's me as a Los Angelino going, you've had enough carbs. This is enough for you. Now we're going to our kale portion of the breakfast. It's just all kale from here on out.
Is that why you kept telling Jake what a wonderful neighborhood you've got for running? I swear to God, about 10 times it came up. Jake was like, "Oh, I think I'd like to watch something on TV." Oh no, well, Jake, we've got a wonderful neighborhood for running. You really have to check it out.
You know what? Here's your shoes. Get out there, and then
I would just do. What's your hurry?
And then I would just do the slow Milton Berle look over to Brad.
And I've already passed out because, after you've eaten your third half a pancake.
Yeah, sure. You can't take all that in at once.
No, you got it. I start to go into carb overload at that point. Holy moly.
At that point in the trip, Brad is bringing out from his luggage the secret cheesesteaks that he had packed from Philadelphia.
Yeah, it wasn't my first trip to Dave's Kitchen. I knew I had to pack.
Yeah. He's dipping into his emergency cheesesteaks. Oh yeah, I'm gonna need this one. Okay, here we go.
Yeah, the only time I didn't hear anything about halves was when we were going through In-N-Out. Then all of a sudden we were at Holes. There was no halves going on at the In-N-Out burger.
Well, listen, I don't know. Okay, I'm gonna give people some context about this half of pancake nonsense. So I had made a ton of pancakes the day before, and there was 5 or 6 left over, and I wasn't going to do the whole thing of getting out the whisk and mixing the bowl and doing. I was like, here, everybody gets to have a pancake. Here's some bacon. Here's some eggs. Here's some fruit. Yeah. I'm not going to make a whole new batch. You jerk. Yeah, I'm not going to make you a fresh pancake.
Listen, I do have to say that is true. He did make a lot of pancakes. He had to have made about 12 halves. And after doing that, holy moly! I mean, that's the first time we use Bisquick over at the Kellett household. It was Bisque, not that fast. It was about half speed.
Well, it's been a good Comic Lab this week, everybody. We'll see you next week. Thanks so much. This has been another episode of Brad's Never Invited to My House Again.
Well. On that note, I guess I better change the subject and say hi. Oh, nope, wait, you do that.
I do that part.
Boy, we've been out of practice.
Well, we switched the abuse around. Normally, I abuse you at the beginning of the show, and then I do the intro. And
I like this way of doing things much better.
You like this version? All right. Well, here we go, everybody. I'm going to warm it up by saying hello, everyone, and welcome back to ComicLab, the show about making comics.
And making a living from comics. I'm Brad Guigar, editor of webcomics.com and cartoonist of Evil Inc.
And I'm his friend Dave Kellett, proprietor of Half a Pancake and cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon and co-director of Stripped.
And this week's hour of comics advice is made possible by your support at patreon.com/comiclab. So Dave, let's talk comics.
Let's talk comic, my friend. And I wanted to start off this week by talking about titles. You got a minute for titles, Brad?
Are you kidding me? For you, I've got 30 seconds.
What generosity. Let me give you another half a pancake. All right.
That's a half a minute.
All right. So here's the thing I want to talk about. If at all you have a comic strip that has more than one character, and who amongst us does not, unless you're writing Ziggy, which, by the way, was there ever a second character in Ziggy? It was just the dog, right?
Well, no, there was a whole cast. He had a dog. He had a parrot. I think at one point there was a horse.
That's right.
Yeah.
There was not a horse.
Maybe I'm thinking Superman.
Well, I'm actively Googling Ziggy horse right now to see what's up. Nope. There is a racehorse called Ziggy, so that works. But anyway, all right. So unless you've got a comic strip that's just Ziggy and a couple of thinking but not talking animals, you're going to be tempted, if you have a really strong single character, to name the comic strip after that character.
Yeah.
And I would like to advise the public, if you're naming a comic strip, and learn from Gary Trudeau and from Dave Kellett, and don't name the comic after what you think is the main character. Because 3 years down the line, 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, you will realize, A, it's either not that main character's comic strip, or B, it is far more of an ensemble strip than you ever intended it to be.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of not appropriate anymore as a title. It's not encapsulating, So Doonesbury, there would be whole years where Doonesbury didn't appear in Doonesbury. Sheldon, for better or for worse, there's big chunks of time where Sheldon does not appear in the comic strip Sheldon. And so I just want to helpfully suggest that if you are starting a new project, if you're starting a new comic strip, maybe don't name it after your main character, with the thought that a couple years down the road, you might have different opinions about who is the quote unquote main character in that comic strip. Brad, what are your thoughts?
Oh, well, I can hear the hard-won advice in your voice. I mean, that this is something that you're up close and familiar with, and I totally get it. I think it's good advice for all of us. I'm trying to think. I guess you technically have to include Guigar in there. My award-winning first high school attempt at comics. That was
that was the Pulitzer Prize-winning comic that I'm trying to remember the name of the artist that came up with that one. I remember reading Guigar in my local paper. Loved it.
Oh yeah. Well, listen, you and scores of others. But no, I mean that. Ironically enough, that's kind of the first thing I did too. Was my first two attempts were technically Guigar and Single Guy, and that was named after the main character. So it's a really easy kind of a mistake to make, something that we don't even think about. And yet, at the same time, like you said, so often these comic strips develop a life of their own. And a lot of times it's not unusual for a secondary character to all of a sudden become your main character. Probably the most famous example of that was Thimble Theater. All of a sudden.
Oh, yeah. What a great example, Brad. Sorry to get excited.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, I don't know if this supports your argument or not. So let's follow this down the road. Thimble Theater comes out, and it basically centers on this quirky little town. And here comes a side character named Popeye. And he's just supposed to be there for a week or so.
Yeah, I think it was just a storyline, right? It was supposed to be one short storyline.
He was an incidental character at best. And all of a sudden, the reaction to him was so great. And I think the artist, E.C. Segar, am I pronouncing that right? Segar or Segar?
It's Guigar. The emphasis is on the final part of the
I always thought it was Cigar because he would sign his name like a cigar. But anyway, the artist loved drawing him. And so all of a sudden, over the next ensuing months and years, Popeye kind of became the main character of that strip. And there's an example, Dave, of it going exactly the opposite of what you're saying. It started out with a generic name, Thimble Theater, and now most people know the comic as Popeye.
Right. Well, and you know what's funny? Another one, just to go back on comics history, Blondie.
Yeah.
The Blondie comic strip was originally started to follow a flapper around, right? Like she was supposed to follow, I remember, like Beautiful Bab and Dumb Dora, those kind of strips. By the way, there was a strip called Dumb Dora. Great job, America. Good work. Anyway, there were these flapper strips, and Blondie was basically an airheaded, fashion-focused socialite flapper named Blondie, right? But then there was a big turn in the strip when they suddenly realized that family strips were in. She marries this Dagwood Bumstead, and then Brad, essentially the next 80 years of that comic strip became about Dagwood Bumstead, you know?
Exactly. And by the way, talking about Dagwood, can we talk about probably the most inspired character design of its time with his hair? Was anybody drawing hair the way they drew Dagwood Bumstead? That's something that hadn't come before and you haven't seen since, the Bumstead hair draw.
Oh, yeah. And was so specific to, I don't remember if it was a quill or a brush, but had that kind of heavy-weighted line at the end of the hair. Remember that?
Yeah. It was kind of unique. I mean, the strip, in my opinion, has kind of seen its better days. But
better days. It's like 400 years old. Of course it's seen its better days.
Well,
like the 19th artist is doing Blondie now.
I'm trying to be polite. But man, oh man, that was great character design when they designed Dagwood. That was fantastic.
Yeah. You know, the chart that Scott McCloud does in Understanding Comics, where he talks about realistic moving to a sliding scale towards iconicity.
Yeah.
And Dagwood is a great representation of how iconic you can make a human face, to the point that you have these ridiculous non sequitur, nonsensical hair things that come out of his head, and yet you still recognize it as an iconic human head, you know?
Yeah. As long as we're talking classic syndicated comics, I want to take one last tangent because I've been meaning to bring this topic up to you for months now, and it just shot off a brain synapse when you mentioned Ziggy. And this is Zippy, the Pinhead, which is a newspaper syndicated comic strip. Have you ever read that strip and had it make sense to you by the last panel?
So a long time ago, right before I got married, I had my kidney fell out of place, and they had to do this laparoscopic surgery and staple my kidney to my back muscle, right? And I'm on a ton of morphine. And they also gave me a finger clicker when the pain got so bad and the morphine wasn't working, so I could click it and get a little bit more pain medication. Yeah. Anyway, it was an incredibly painful operation. And so the morphine that the nurse gave me by pill form hadn't kicked in yet. It was like 15 more minutes. So I'm clicking away at the thing going, ow, 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 click, 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 click. And then all of a sudden, both the morphine and the drip medication kicked in at the same time. Yeah. Brad, I felt like I was being launched into space. It was like stars were around me. I felt like I was on a rocket to the moon. And then all of a sudden I was like, oh, Zippy makes sense now.
I saw that coming up Broad Street and I loved it anyway. I'm telling you, but here's the deal. That strip is widely syndicated. Who is reading that? Who's approving that? And I'm asking this as a genuine question. Do I need a decoder ring? What am I missing with that strip?
All right, so I can give you a bit of backstory about it. I don't know. I don't know it in detail, but the story behind this, as I remember it, Jay Cunnedy, the much beloved editor at King Features, who has since passed away, rest his soul, he was a big fan of the zine culture, the independent culture, and the fly-by-night comic culture of San Francisco and of the Midwest, and had a huge collection of indie and single-run kind of comics, the kind of stuff that you would produce on your own and manually sell to comic shops around San Francisco, that kind of thing, right? And Bill Griffith, if I remember this story correctly, and I may be misremembering it, so forgive me if I do, he and was I think either contacted by Jay Kennedy or he contacted Jay Kennedy, and they hit it off when he became a King Feature Syndicate. And Jay said, I want to try to make this into a mainstream comic strip. And I think both of them were like, well, let's see if it works. And sure enough, Jay brought it into newspapers. It sold into enough that it could stay going. And it was kind of this weird, wonderful fixture in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. I mean, I know it's still going, but it had its moment in the 80s, 90s there, where people were like, what is this strip? This is weird and wonderful and different than every other strip in America. And literally no other comic strip before or since in American newspapers has been like Zippy the Pinhead. It is so, whatever you think of it, you have to give it credit that it is a unique comic strip.
That, I guess, if you frame it in that way, yes, I've got to agree with you. There's nothing else like it. Thank goodness.
So, if your question is, how did it get in there, and would Dave Kellett have done it? I don't know, and probably not. But like, I'm quietly impressed that somehow they got that into American newspapers, because just for the chutzpah of it, you're just like, wow, how could you have imagine going into an editor, Brad, at the Des Moines Register and being like, hey, I'm from King Feature Syndicate. We're from New York. How are you? Listen, we've got this comic strip. We've got this comic strip that makes absolutely no sense, and it uses the English language like a playground of nonsense. And here we go. We'd like you to, and has a character that what is the condition in what do you call Pinhead in a medical sense?
Oh, hydroencephalitis or just encephalitis? I'm not sure.
I don't remember. Darn it. Anyway, so also all the features that kids love, great for the family. It's called Zippy the Pinhead. It's going to be $20 a week. Would you like to buy it? No. This is the Des Moines Register. Do you have anything about kids and a dog?
Yeah, you do have to give it credit in that respect. I mean, he really has made a go of it.
Brad Guigar. Anyway, how did we get on Zippy the Pinhead? Did you bring that up?
It's all your fault. You brought Ziggy up, and I can't think of Ziggy without thinking of Zippy.
Well, Ziggy, yeah, you're not wrong. Ziggy is amazing to me in that thing was a cash cow for about 15 years there.
Oh, yeah. Oh, especially in the 70s.
Remember the licensing program for Ziggy at Hallmark and stuff when we were kids?
Yep.
Good God, that thing made a lot of money.
Do you remember having his son on Webcomics Weekly?
No, I have no memory of that at all.
Oh, it was such a
Was
sweet
this when I got
story.
my kidney surgery done?
This was during your kidney surgery, and we're like, oh, finally we can get some stuff done. No, we had his son on, and he talked about how his father trained him to be to take over the strip. And when they were at a restaurant, you get those little paper mats for kids and the crayons. He would draw Ziggy in a situation and then challenge his son to get him out of that situation. He was teaching him creative thinking, like an analog version of Scribblenauts.
Right.
And he would train his son to think laterally and to make creative leaps and so forth. And he says, I realized later that my dad was training me to take over the strip.
So that is very interesting. Did he ever talk about why his father never gave Ziggy pants?
Well, listen, that was de rigueur back then. I mean, do you remember Love Is? we talked about that. It was the 70s. 70s, nobody had pants on back then. Pogo didn't have pants. Love Is didn't have pants. It was a whole pantsless funny pages.
There is a genre of American comics, holy shit, that doesn't have pants. Donald Duck, Ziggy, who are the other ones you mentioned?
Pogo.
Pogo, right?
There was a whole bunch of them. None of the animals had pants on, and a good number of the humans. I don't think the Wizard of Id ever really wore pants. He just had kind of a long beard.
What's so weird about that too is they all kind of had the Ken Smoothmound downstairs. Like no one had anything going on. It would have been kind of amazing actually if Ziggy's walking around as just bait and tackle swinging around, as a.
You see his Ziggy junk.
Yeah, like if Ziggy was, standing in a road and saying something like, I started out on the highway of life, but somehow I ended up on a cow path, and then you just see Ziggy's hog, that would just be the worst.
That's how you'd know you come to the punchline. And all of a sudden the last panel would go, boing!
Oh, God. I did not see the conversation ending up in this direction. Oh, boy. When we started today's show, I did not sit down with my coffee and go, I wonder if we'll end up on Ziggy's junk today. Boy.
Oh, man. I'm trying to think of how that would be drawn. Would it have its own little smiley face?
It would be very pleasantly rounded. That's all I know.
Yes, you better believe it.
I mean, here's the scary part. Look at Ziggy's feet. If you look at the size of Ziggy's feet, I think that would be a horror show. We would not want this Ziggy comic.
Well, you can always tell by the size of their feet.
Don't finish that sentence. All right. Oh, man. So here's the weirder part, and maybe this is my own etymological ignorance. Did Ziggy Stardust come from Ziggy the comic strip?
Oh, that's a really good question. I don't honestly know the answer to it. That might be worth a little bit of Google foo.
That's worth the Google. Anyway, let's move us off of Ziggy's junk and tackle a $5 question, my friend. What do you think?
I've got one queued right up here, ready for you to listen to. You ready for this?
All right, let's do it.
Oh, I got to read the intro. A lot of times I skip the intros, but this is very nice. I have to start with sending huge amounts, dollops, bucketfuls of gratitude for your answers to my last question. Thinking in story chunks is really getting my creative motor running. That's back when we were talking about maximizing your updates, because obviously there's somebody coming into your comic for the first time at any given time, and you've got to think about those stories in significant chunks.
Right.
So this person says, thank you so much for that. This time they've got an art question. I've spent much of the extensive time between strips on improving my drawing skills, and so my character designs have changed on an almost strip-by-strip basis. How strongly would you advise me to go back and redraw for consistency's sake? I'm tempted to just leave it, since the very few people who've seen the strips, nobody's mentioned it. But would this still be okay if I somehow eventually manage to publish it as a book? Thanks in advance for any helpful advice or entertaining tips. So, Dave, what do you think? And this is a question that comes up an awful lot. Whether for this person's specific instance or not, either like this person is happening very rapidly. But for others, it's like they've been doing a strip or a comic for several years, and they look back at those first ones. They're like, I don't draw this character like that anymore, or my art style has changed. Should I go back and redraw those old strips? What do you think?
Okay, so I have a lot of different thoughts, and they're all competing on this. So forgive me if I'm all over the map on this. But when you go to publish your first book, this moment that you're feeling right now is going to be the most demonstrative, because those early years of a comic strip or a comic title or a project, that's when you're going to experience the most change in terms of project designs and character designs, right?
Yeah.
So I just want you to rest assured that by the time book 2 and 3 come around, you're not going to have this problem. You're, for the most part, going to have settled into a rhythm. So, A, that's my one bit of assurance. So, B, Brad and I have a long-standing concern of both with others and ourselves with going back and retreading old strips. Because part of the problem is it becomes recursive. Where do you stop? Like, once you've redrawn the first 30, then you're looking at number 31 and going, well, I guess actually that could be redone too. And then you do 30 through 41 and you're like, well, frankly, all these number 41 through 62 could all be redone too. And you can see where this is going, is that as your style is advancing, as you're improving, you're just getting more and more recursive and retreading old ground. And frankly, there's something both creatively not helpful and mentally not helpful in going back and redoing old strips, right? So that's my second thought on that. And then my third thought is completely countering that. If you have a long form story, sometimes it is weird if a character looks very different on page 1 versus page 300. So it's different for a comic strip, which people I think are more forgiving of, or a comic panel, where they see the progress from, for example, Bill Eamon's Foxtrot, and they see how different Jason looks in the first years versus how Jason looks now, right? No one's going to be like, wait a minute, this is a different strip.
Right.
But if you open the first couple pages of Bone, and maybe to Jeff Smith, they look very different. Bone, all 3 Bones kind of look the same as they do on page 300. So it's okay, it kind of works. So for me with Drive, I will admit that I went back and George Lucas, I don't know, 5 to 15 very select strips that always bugged me. But keep in mind, this was in the context of a 500-page story so far. And I was very selective in it, and I did it only to fit into the larger context of the character designs across 500 pages. But in general, I do think my advice is don't get recursive in redrawing old stuff. But Brad, I've talked too long. What are your thoughts on this?
I'm telling you, Dave, you've really hit on something that was new, and we've talked about this topic a lot in the past in different channels. But you hit on something I never thought about. It is much less forgivable in a short form comic to redraw old strips, and much more forgivable in a long form comic to redraw old strips for all the reasons you just mentioned. I never thought about the difference between the two. And a lot of the advice that I'd given was coming from a comic strip background, where I say, just don't redraw that old stuff. Come on, don't. You're chasing your tail. But yeah, you're right. And perhaps the advice is that you gave is just right on the money. In a long form strip, not necessarily redrawing entire pages, but redrawing characters, and like you said, George Lucasing it in. So you're not necessarily redrawing entire pages, but you're just tweaking that character a little bit. For a long-form comic, I find that a lot more forgivable and maybe in some cases desirable. For a strip, not so much. In fact, for a comic strip, I want to see that character's progression. I enjoy seeing how Opus looked in the beginning of Bloom County and how he changed over the years. I wanted that to happen. I wanted to follow that. That was part of the joy of that, and also part of the documentation of that. In other words, there's something to be said for a print collection as an archive, as a historical document. And being true to that history is something that I have an appreciation for as a reader. I don't know whether that's standard among readers in general, but that's something that I definitely enjoy. But yeah, I think you're right on the money.
I have to tell you, Brad, I have never thought of it that way in terms of wanting to see the change in characters.
Yeah.
And I don't know if this is because I am myself a cartoonist and appreciate the process of how it happened, that I want to see how Opus changed, and I want to see how Jason Fox changed, and I want to see how Calvin changed. I think if most people were pressed, they would say they enjoy that too. However, there's always a vocal sub-minority that goes, this feels different. I like the way you used to draw it, that kind of thing.
Yes.
But that's true from literally the first comic strip to the next week when Yellow Kid appeared for the second time. They're like, I like the way you used to draw Yellow Kid last week.
Right.
So that's happened literally since the beginning of comic strips. So you can't focus on that. But focusing on most people, I think you're right. I never actively thought about this before, but I think most people like seeing the change in process. For characters,
and it's part of the joy of seeing the strip mature over time. Is
don't
seeing
say
that change.
mature. Must we go through this every? Mature. I will throw you out with the manure if you.
Well,
anyway.
Listen, as we're at this juncture, I want to, because we had another question that delves right into this, and it dovetails nicely, and it's basically the next question. So listen, J. Lark writes, I'm considering simplifying and streamlining the art style of my comic in order to spend less time on my art. I don't think the change will be too drastic, but definitely will be noticeable. Would you recommend rolling out visual changes gradually over time, or just rip the Band-Aid off and go with the new style? Should I ask my readers, patrons, what they think of the change, or not even draw attention to it? So basically, this is an artist that is noticing their art style changing, or wants to physically change it and do it a different way. Should you do it immediately, or should you phase it in over time?
Wow. Okay. Well, I have seen both done in comic strips. And I will be honest that my own reaction was I preferred the phasing in, but I don't know which one is healthier for the artist because phasing in as a conscious choice is weird. It's hard to manually change your style. By manual, I mean like now I will draw the eyes 10% different than last week. Now I will do 10% more than the week before. Like that's a weird artistic process. Like if you can imagine it as a slowly changing CGI over 10 weeks, like that's hard to do. But
the only artist that successfully pulled that off was Wally Wood while he was drawing Power Girl. Do you know that story?
No, I don't know that. I especially don't know that sequence. So what did he do?
Well, Wally Wood, one of my favorite artists, was drawing for DC, and I don't know whether he made a bet, but he decided that every time he drew Power Girl, he was going to add an inch to her bust line until one of the editors mentioned something. And he went several months this way. That's the reason that when that Power Girl, one of her distinguishing characteristics is that she's drawn pretty much the way she's drawn today, is because Wally Wood decided he wanted to see how far he could get away with it.
Comics when they were drawn and edited exclusively by dudes. That's what that is.
For guys. Yep.
Yeah. That's well. Great job, comics. Way to succeed once again. So I'd never heard that story. That's kind of funny. It's funny only in the context of like, that is an intentional choice. Okay, well, let me talk about this one. So the couple of comic strips that I have followed over the years that made a slow or drastic change to their comics. I do remember, and I brought it up before, Foxtrot, when it changed somewhere around year 2 or 3. And I think I've talked to Bill. We should have Bill on the show, by the way. I think I talked to him about it, and I said, it took me a couple years as a reader to get past the change. I still like the previous versions of Foxtrot as a family. And he's like, great, thanks for telling me that. You know, everyone loves to hear that. Thanks so much.
Thanks for your feedback.
Thanks for the feedback, Dave Kellett. Great. And then I apologized and realized I had become comic book man. I like the previous version. So that happened. But then I remember Scott Kurtz has made both drastic and slow changes, incremental changes to PvP. Yeah. And he has had differing success with both. And that some people loved it when it was a quick change, and some people liked it when it was a slow change. Do you remember how he went about that? I don't remember.
I don't remember how he did it. I remember him I mean, geez, this is like old folks home episode, because we also talked about this on Webcomics Weekly. And he said that he had gotten advice from his brother, who said that he wanted, he really felt strongly that he should phase it in slowly. And of course, I think that was during the time that Scott was making extensive use of templates. So he kind of changed his templates that he was using for his character design, and he was able to do it that way. But I got a completely different approach to this, and that's because I've never felt like I had a style that I drew in. It's just, this is as good as I can draw, and that's the result of it. You know, I've never been able to like these people that can draw in other people's styles. Like you see Lar D'Souza do this all the time. He can mimic somebody's style dead on. Or there's some people that do it professionally. Like I'm going to draw a SpongeBob comic book now. Great. Give me the characters, and then it looks exactly, everything's on model. Everything's perfect.
Yeah, I can think of a few artists like that. Dylan McConas can go on model for a bunch of styles. Chris Straub can go on style for a bunch of styles. Jake Parker actually can go do a bunch of styles. Laura can do a bunch of styles. You're right. And I'm always jealous of that.
I always look at them and I go, I can barely draw like Brad Guigar on a good day, let alone trying to draw like somebody else. So for me, I've always been like, just rip off the Band-Aid, just change, draw like you're going to draw. And people are going to get used to the new ones. Of course, you're going to have people saying that they liked it the old way. That's going to happen one way or the other. That's going to happen if you take a month to do the change. If you take a year to do the change, somebody's still going to go back to that one version. They're still going to point to it, no matter how many strips are between that one and your new style. So I personally am in favor of just adapting that new style and running with it, and never looking back.
Yeah, this is a tricky question, but I think I lean towards Brad on this one. I think he's right. Because in general, let's take a bigger bird's eye philosophical view of this, Brad, is that in general, you always want to be moving forward. Stasis can be bad for both your creativity and for your creations. So the idea of being open and welcoming to change and to betterment, especially, that's a good thing to cultivate in your mind and in your heart. So yeah, I think this is a tricky one, but I think I would land with Brad too. That it's probably better to just pull off the Band-Aid. This is what you want to draw. And by the way, there's absolutely going to be complaints, like Brad said, and you just got to be like, well, sorry, this is the way I'm drawing now. This is the way I do it.
And remember, whenever any of this stuff comes up, remember this. We tend to think that we have a finite number of readers to pull from.
Oh, I'm so glad you're saying this. Yes. Okay, keep going.
We think that the number of potential comics readers is finite, that there's 100 of them out there, and we have to try to get at least 50 of them to become successful. No, there is an infinite number of potential readers out there, and it's changing all the time. And some of your fervent readers are falling away today. And today, somebody's coming to your comic for the first time that's going to turn into a super fan in a few years. And it's an infinite number. And the people that you lose today, you can replace tomorrow from that infinite pool. So don't get too wound up about losing readers or readers liked it the way it used to be. Just remember, it's an infinite pool. And if your work is good, and if you're putting the passion in, you're putting the work in, you're going to fish from that infinite pool just fine. Right?
In fact, the fact that you're asking this question makes me think that you're probably towards the beginning end of your career, side of your career. And the good news there is that whatever 100, 500, 5,000, 50,000 readers you have right now, there's only the future available to you, in the sense that whatever you have now, to Brad's point, it can only grow, really. I mean, with betterment, you can only get to a bigger and bigger audience. So I will just basically co-sign and give a high five retweet to Brad on that one. And I think that is a brilliant end.
Absolutely.
Hey, if you're listening while you work, take a minute to stand and stretch.
And while you're doing that, we're going to tell you why you should join us on Patreon.
When you do, you're going to get hours and hours of podcasts that we've recorded just for backers.
And exclusive Patreon posts that go even deeper on ComicLab topics.
And access to our exclusive Discord server, which is a thriving community of professional cartoonists.
So you can support the show you love and get tons of actionable resources for your own cartooning.
And listen, if you can't swing a pledge this month, we get it. No worries.
Yeah, listen, you can still support the show by rating us wherever you get your podcasts.
Just leave a 5-star review and a few kind words.
That, along with mentions on social media, is incredibly helpful.
Now, everybody, let's talk comics. Well, all right, Brad, I got our next $5 backer over at patreon.com/ComicLab. It's Cole Chadwick, and Cole writes, Dave and Brad, I was wondering, English, I'm new to it. Dave and Brad, I was wondering what your take on splash pages are for webcomics. Since a good part of the power of splash pages come from the page turn in a traditional comic, do you think they carry the same oomph with a vertical or horizontal scroll? And if so, do you have any suggestions for making a more compelling splash page? I've been loving the podcast and have burned through all the episodes. I want to thank you guys for doing the show. It has been such a great inspiration to me, seeing it's actually possible to make money with webcomics, something I wasn't sure I could ever do. So here's a big thanks from a new comics artist. What a nice ending, Cole. That's a great way to ask a question. Thank you, Cole. So, Brad, let's jump back in on this. So, splash pages, as everyone knows, was either the traditional first page of a comic where, Wolverine would be jumping through the forest, or, 14 pages in where Mr. Fantastic was punching Dr. Doom in the noggin, and it was a big, giant splash page, lots of color, lots of line work, a lot of work on it. Brad, how could you make a splash page work in a webcomic? Go.
This is such a great topic. First of all, let's talk about the history of the splash page. Splash pages originated because early comic book artists were getting paid by the page. Right? They didn't get paid by the panel, they got paid by the page. And they had to put out a certain number of pages for their comic. What's the best way to maximize the money you're getting and to also make sure that you can meet that deadline of however many pages per month? Is make one of the pages, at least one of the pages, one big illustration.
Yeah. I'm going to draw with a big crayon for this page.
Yeah. Big, thick lines. Second only to the John Byrne snowstorm approach that he took for for one chapter.
Chef's kiss. I was going to bring that up myself. It is the greatest FU to all of comics. I'm so proud of John Byrne for that. That snowstorm fight. Oh, it's amazing. All right, keep going.
Yes and no. Remember, Byrne was at the same time he was doing Alpha Flight, he was writing and drawing Marvel's top tier book, Fantastic Four. And he had just gotten behind on the deadlines. It was going to be impossible for him to meet the deadline. So he's like, okay, I'm going to do the snowstorm now.
Yeah, I think he was also, at the same time, he had also been assigned a few covers to do, and he was like, I can't, there's no physical way I can do this.
Yeah,
so I'm delighted. I know the full story of it, but chef's kiss on submitting 12 pages of pure white copy in a snowstorm. It literally is the joke of a cow eating vanilla ice cream in a snowstorm, and that's what he did.
Yeah,
Great.
It was beautiful. So the splash page came about basically as a way to get a good page rate increase for a little bit less work. Do I think they're good for webcomics? My short answer is not really, but maybe. In other words, I think a landing page is a good idea for a webcomic. In other words, I've often said, especially for a long form comic, that you shouldn't have your most recent page up on your site necessarily. Instead, your site should be a landing page that gives the first time viewer an idea of what's going on and gives them multiple entry points into your comic. In other words, they can come in on today's page. They can come at the beginning of the current chapter. They can go back 3 chapters and go in and entry points on any one of those. I think landing pages are very, very powerful, especially for long-form comics. Splash pages? Nah, I not as great, especially because from my way of thinking, again, every day somebody's coming to your comic for the first day. And splash pages, by and large, are more meant for a tease than they are for storytelling, right? They're kind of a tease into the story.
Right.
They're kind of setting the stage. And there's not a lot of storytelling that goes on in a splash page. And for that reason, I'm not super charged up about the idea of incorporating splash pages into my webcomic. What do you think?
Well, in general, I agree with you. First of all, thank you for taking us through the history, because I think it's funny how money always influences how art is made, and that's absolutely the case. It's kind of like how, and this is a total side tangent, but how science fiction and pulp authors were paid by the word, and so you had a generation of science fiction authors like Asimov and Ray Bradbury and stuff that got very florid with their language, and because it was like, oh, and then the aliens landed on the most crustaceous planet, like just making up weird florid language to get that a couple extra bucks at the end of the week, Anyway,
the alien was not only green, he was very, very, very green.
Yeah.
Those tricks that you do in high school to try and get to the word count on your essay.
Yeah, his verdant amber hues were tonally, anyway. Anyway, I actually will differ with Brad on one point, is that sometimes a splash page, which for lack of a better phrase is just a gigantic ass panel, sometimes a splash page can be very helpful in long form storyline when you want to show a battle scene, or when you want to show a moment of great isolation amidst a huge forest, or when you want to show a single sailor alone on a raft on a giant sea. I'm just trying to think of other situations where for me with Drive, it's, oh boy, I really want to show this space battle with a lot of lasers going pew pew pew, and the ships are blowing up, and there's a planet in the background. Like when you want to have a panel that really shows off, for lack of a better phrase, the artwork of the story, where instead of having any words, you're going to have a lot of art doing the work. A splash page type panel can be very helpful.
Right.
Is it needed in the sense of a physical page turn in comics? No. But frankly, a page click is a version of a page turn. And with the idea that, as Brad and I always state, you should be creating your webcomic with the final goal of making money in print at some point down the line. So I designed my Drive splash pages to literally be splash pages in a physical book, so that when you turn from page 92 to 93, you're like, oh, look at this with the lasers and the pew, pew, pew. So that's my answer to that one, Brad. Do you find difficulty with that? Are you angry at me? Are you having a Ziggy reaction to this? What's happening?
I can sum up my reaction in one word.
God, what makes that more terrifying is imagining Ziggy's dog, who is about at eye level, and he's like, God damn it, Ziggy, no, not right now.
Either get me stilts or get me the hell out of this panel.
Yeah, you know what? Let's call in the parrot today, everybody. That's a wrap for the dog. That's a wrap for the dog. Let's bring the parrot in on the parrot stock. He's up at head level. Thank you very much.
We don't have the parrot's perch ready, Ziggy says. No problem.
Oh, jeez. Brad Guigar, everybody. Terrible golf slow clap.
Always one step too far. So listen, two things. Number one, a lot of what you said, I would make the distinction between a splash page and a full panel or full page panel, right? A full page panel is not necessarily a splash page. A splash page, for me at least, generally has like a chapter title. It has the names of the creative staff, all this other stuff. A splash page for me is a very certain thing. And it's, in other words, if I was doing an SAT test, not all splash pages are full page panels, but a full page panel can be a splash page, right?
Right.
So but having said that, having kind of like weaseled my way through that little argument, I will say this: having listened to you, especially to denote the start of a new chapter and to give an introduction and also to give your audience a new starting place, a new jumping on place. The idea of a chapter title splash page that says, okay, we're starting a new part of the storyline. I kind of find that appealing. So you're kind of making me rethink what I said there. Other than to say, I still think landing pages are a really good idea, but I'm not going to be quite as negative towards splash pages because I think particularly giving some navigation to your readers on a long form comic in terms of like where new chapters are starting might be a pretty good idea. So I'm going to backtrack a little bit. Still a big fan of landing pages. Everything I said there, I stand by, but I'm not quite as down on splash pages specifically as I was a couple minutes ago, because I think you turned me around a little bit there.
All right. Well, that's fair. I got to tell you, if a big part of the show is me proving to you that you're wrong, then we've succeeded. I think that's we've done our work.
Between you and my wife, I now my days are complete.
I'm the counterbalancing blow from the other direction, knocking you back towards the house again. So if you I do want to swing back around another thing that Brad said that I think is very smart and which I have never done, which is the landing page for a long form storyline. Brad's idea is a brilliant one. And I wholeheartedly endorse that, even though I have never done it myself. And frankly, I don't know why I haven't done it. I should get on that and I should do it. It wouldn't be hard to do. And I'll tell you who did it really well. Mike Norton did a wonderful series called Battle Pug. And I think it's at battlepug.com. I'm not sure. I should check that up. But anyway, just search Battle Pug. You'll find it. He's restarting it, by the way. But he always had a landing page that I thought was really compelling. And I think he even had what could only be called an exit page at the end of the story. And I always thought both of those were really smart, really well done, and well executed. Anyway, that's just me co-signing and high-five retweeting Brad on the idea of a landing page. I think that's a very smart idea, even though I, Dave Kellett, have not done it yet.
Well, I got a feeling this is going to be the year, and we'll be talking about this some more. This is going to be the year that a lot of us are going to be changing up our websites. I've just got a feeling we're going to all be making a change this year.
Yeah, it's I'm due for it. I don't know if I'm going to have the time this year because Brad knows it. I now have another secret project that I've started in the vein of Stripped, the documentary that I made on comics. And I think that's going to require a Kickstarter in the next 2 to 3 months. And so my plans for the year have changed not slightly, in a very big chunk because of this new project. But I think my website is going to have to be deferred to next year. But I agree with you, Brad. I desperately need to redo my website and websites and get that going.
Yeah.
Oh, speaking of pages, though, I don't know why this brought up in my mind, but do you remember a few shows ago, maybe 10, 15 shows ago, I was making fun of you for your sketch wallet because I was joking around about the pen must stab you in the butt, that kind of a thing?
Yeah.
So this is they haven't paid anything, but they sent along for me to see one of the sketch wallet models, and I got to say, it arrived, and it's really lovely. It's well made. It's canvas. It's got I don't know that I am the perfect use for it, but I see artists in my life that I'm like, oh, I see why they would carry a sketch pad all around with them, and that's great. So a little public shout out to Sketch Wallet for sending that along, because I'm glad I saw it. I see now how it works, and it's basically a wallet on one side, sketch on the other side, tiny little pencil that tucks in cleverly, well made. So without any payment from them, well done on making the Sketch Wallet. That was good.
Oh, I got to tell you, I love mine, and I do some sketches in it. It's just good to have something that you can write a note down on. I printed out little calendars and pasted in calendars at the end of my sketchbook. So when stuff's going on with the kids or whatever, and they say, oh, we're going to go see, we're going to go to a play in August, I can just go to my calendar because I know I'm supposed to take my iPhone out and then open up this app, and I can't hit the buttons with the right amount of speed. I'm a lot better if I just write it down in the moment. It's going to take me 2 seconds, and then later on I transfer it from that to my iPhone when I have time to go tack.
So Brad was showing me, because he has a different version than the one that they sent me. Brad was showing me his sketch wallet, and he showed me this little calendar that he has pasted in the back, and I have to share this because this moment encapsulates Brad for me. So he's got different things handwritten on this tiny little calendar, things like choir practice or, ultimate Frisbee match or trip with the family. And then on the 4th of July, there's a month that says July at the top of it, and then there's a date that has a 4 on it, right? He has manually written on that day, 4th of July, exclamation point. And it's like, yeah, no shit, dipshit. It literally is the 4th of July. You don't need to write 4th of July, exclamation point on it.
Well, it's a holiday. I wanted to make sure that I knew where the holiday was.
So when I saw that, I immediately took the pancake that I was going to give Brad and I cut it in half. And I gave half to Jake Parker because I was like, no, you don't get a full pancake in this house if you write 4th of July on a calendar.
Oh, thank God you didn't see what I had written down for the 5th of May.
Also, it was the exclamation point that sold it. 4th of July, exclamation point.
Hey, I really like fireworks. What can I tell you?
I love the idea, though, that you wouldn't have remembered that the 4th of July is coming as you're like, it's July 1st. Huh. I feel like there's something I'm forgetting. I wish I would have written it down. 2nd of July. I don't know. There's something on the horizon. Don't know what's coming. 3rd of July. Suddenly a lot of flags are everywhere in your life. The smell of barbecue is all over. What could be happening in my neighborhood? 4th of July, literally a parade down your street. People setting off fireworks everywhere. You're like, I don't know what today is. What is I wish you know what? Next year I'm going to write 4th of July with an exclamation point.
With the exclamation point.
All right. Well, anyway, that's enough abuse of Brad's exclamation point. So anyway, let's go to another $5 question. This comes from another Patreon backer over at patreon.com/ComicLab. And it's from Prox, Dad and Brave. Wow. I've done that before.
Holy moly.
Dad and Brave. Oh my God. Brad and Dave. I'm a working artist with an extremely fulfilling dream art job. Yet, I still want to do my own stuff after work. Can you talk about the guilt that comes from not working on passion projects after work for someone whose day job is creatively fulfilling and rewarding? What are some things you do to gain a second wind after coming home from work and needing to cook dinner for the family, do the dishes, etc., etc.? Also, my spouse has her own art career, and so giving her my share of housework is out of the question. Hey, actually, are there some practical domestic life tips, meal prep, laundry, etc., that helped you gain back some of your time? Well, okay, so this is a couple questions rolled into one, but the basic idea, Brad, is I think it's 1-2. How do you maintain the energy and time after coming home from a perfectly fulfilling art-related job, daytime, and then making time and energy for your own art projects at night? Brad Geiger, you have lived this life, as have I. Go. What are your suggestions?
Well, it's a tough one, and really, you've got to take one of two different approaches based on how your internal wiring is, right? Because I don't think this is a one size fits all question. So one approach is to take the pressure off and to say, "Hey, I've got a very fulfilling job. I'm getting a lot of creative fulfillment, and maybe it's okay if I don't come right home and start working on another fulfilling thing. How much fulfilling can you possibly have in your life? You can say, hey, maybe I'm going to take the pressure off." And do this when I have the energy and when I have the time. And again, you've got depending on how old you are, you have a lot of years ahead of you, most likely, and it's okay if this thing you're working on doesn't get done immediately. So one way you can approach this is to take the pressure off and say, I'm going to just work on this when it feels right, and that's okay. For me, to be fair, I wasn't feeling quite as fulfilled in my day job, especially towards the end. Particularly towards the end, I wasn't getting a whole lot of fulfilling happening there. But for me, it came down to scheduling. It came down to I had certain times of day that my wife and I kind of agreed this is comics making time. And we both kind of signed off on it. And it's not as if that was like a sacred time. Like if something happened with the kids or whatever, a doctor appointment came up, this thing or that thing, sometimes comics time got bit into. But for the most part, we tried to make it so that was time for me to work on the comic, because that was something that we both prioritized in our lives together. And that helped. And again, like I've said on the show before, I also was a big fan of taking the time that nobody else wanted. So that meant getting up in the morning before anybody else was awake and staying up long after everybody had gone to sleep. That was time that nobody wanted, that I could have all for myself. All I had to do was take it. All I had to do was make sure that I was able to wake up in the morning or stay up a little bit later at night. But that's how I did it. How did you do it, Dave?
So there's both a half joking and a half serious answer that I honestly neglected my health for the better part of a decade as I was trying to do a bunch of things. And that's not great. I don't recommend that.
Right.
And what that meant is I drank a lot of coffee and I ate a lot of sugar, and I gained 30 to 40 pounds over the course of a decade or 15 years there. And I didn't work out as much, and I drew very late into the night, like 2 a.m., 3 a.m. a lot of nights. And I probably went prematurely gray because of that. And so none of this, looking back on it, none of that sounds fantastic. That all sounds terrible.
Right.
But
Right.
it's kind of the truth, though. I that's what I did. My wife could not have been more supportive, and I hope vice versa, about each of us pursuing our art careers. And so that was never the problem. But even though I never skimped on relationship time, there were a lot of friendships in and around LA that I just didn't have as much time for, because people would be like, hey, we're all going out to such and such. And I'd be like, no, I got to do my comic strip tonight,
Yeah.
And that's the truth, Brad. I didn't socialize as much for a while because, and it all comes down to, and for me, this was an okay choice. You only get one life, and you only get a certain chance to do the things you really want to do. And I never wanted to get to 50 years old and be like a poetry professor I had who said, I could have been a really good poet, and I never really put in the time. So instead, I'm a poet professor. And that always stuck with me in grad school when I took that class, because I was like, geez, Louise, to be 50 years old and you still have the time. You could be a great poet now. But he had already kind of mentally given up, as though his time had passed. So I never wanted to look back on my life going, I could have been a cartoonist. I'm living a perfectly happy life, but I could have been a cartoonist.
Yeah.
And so for me, that was always a big driver. And so if that meant giving up video games, giving up TV, giving up friendships, and by the way, not giving up anything, but just really cutting back on them. And it also meant for me not going to the gym as much as I should have, not eating as well as I should have, because I was staying up late at my drawing desk, eating M&Ms and drinking coffee to cartoon till 2 a.m. And these are the honest to God truth. And so none of this is a healthy solution. But what I will say is, if it's something that you really want to do in addition to your day job, you will find the time. And if you don't, sometimes that is an indicator of how much you want or don't want to do it. And that's okay too.
Right.
For example, if you have new kids, my God, did my cartooning suffer during those years? Because guess what? My kids are way more important than any comic strip I will ever do or cartooning I will ever do. So of course my comics suffered for those first 3 to 5 years. And that is okay. I will never look back in my life with regret for that. But when it was me newly married or me as a bachelor, I was like, I would stay up till 2, 3 in the morning and cartoon happily because I loved cartooning and that's what I wanted to do. And so other life tips that I can give to you is that in your cartooning process and in general in life, if you have a process that you repeat more than once or twice, look for efficiencies. Take a day to find efficiencies so that by organizing it better, by creating templates, by doing this or that, by creating steps in Photoshops or actions so that you can cut down on how you scan to becoming a single button. Things like that. If you do a process more than twice, that process, I guarantee, can be cut down by better organization and by better templating and by better scheduling for it. Do you know what I mean by that, Brad?
Yep, down to like Photoshop actions and stuff like that. Anything you can automate, anything you can, like Dave said, anything you do more than once, find out where you can make those simpler and get them done quicker because that's going to add minutes to the important stuff that you need to do.
And let's say that setting up those Photoshop actions takes you 2 hours. You will gain that back within a month. I promise you, because those actions shave off 5 minutes every day from your comic strip, or your comic. And so you add that up and bada bing, bada boom, within a month or two, you're there. And then all the years forward, you have these Photoshop actions set up. Another thing that I would used to do is I used to hand draw, Brad, my overall comic strip where I would take the ruler and I would go line, and then I would turn the ruler and go line, and then I would turn the ruler again and go line, and then that was my outer square, and then I would do the lettering guide, line, 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 line. And what that meant is a bunch of drawing and then a bunch of erasing at the end of it, right?
Yep.
So then what I did was I created a template in Photoshop that had both the panel breakdowns, the overall panel widths, the overall comic strip width, various like 1 panel, 2 panels, 3 panel, 4 panel strips, and then had all the lettering guides built into this template. I take it to Kinko's. I make a what do you call it when you wrap it in plastic? What's that called?
Laminate.
Sorry. I super industrially laminated it so that I made like 3 of them in case I ever lost one. So then I had that part done and set in stone. I didn't have to do any measuring anymore. And then the other thing I did was I needed to draw the outer edge of a comic strip panel, which is about 5 inches high and about 14 inches wide. And every day that would be 4 ruler turns and lining it up and doing it right and lining it up and doing it right. So what I did was I went and had an engineer friend at Mattel cut out a piece of 1/16 or 1/8 PVC plastic, and he cut out a templated comic strip so I could just go whoop, whoop, whoop with a pencil, and then bada bing, bada boom, I had a comic strip done. And what I've done now in the more digital age is I just have drawn the comic strip digitally. And so then I print that out and then I light box it, bada bing, bada boom. That's even easier. So what I'm getting at is anytime you do something more than once, find a way to shorten the process, find a way to cheat, create templates, create shortcuts, create actions, and that will save you a lot of time over the months and years ahead.
Yep. And I've got one other tip that's more of a household tip, a little Heloise tip, although I guess they call them life hacks now. But my wife it does this, and it really helps out the family. She does a ton of meal prep on like Sunday. So, she goes shopping for groceries over the weekend. Sunday she is cooking up a storm, mostly like lunches and stuff like that, but also like dinners and later on. As much meal prep as you can do heading into the week. That's a huge plus because then I've got a bunch of Tupperware lunches. I just bring in to the studio, pop them in the microwave. It's minimal cleanup because the major cleanup's already been done Sunday. That's a huge plus. Is anything like that? You can say, okay, I've got Sunday open. I'm going to make all the lunches for the rest of the week. I'm going to do a couple dinners I can put in the oven and heat up and have ready to go. Learning how to use a crock pot is a huge plus. And now they've got like those Instapots that are even better. That's half pressure cooker and half crock pot. learning how to use that kind of stuff where you can make what my wife calls dump meals, where you just dump everything in the crock pot on your way out the door to work. And when you come home, it's done because it's been slow cooking all day.
Right.
That kind of stuff saves a ton of time. And if you can find a life partner that does that, like if that's not your skill set, and not something you care to do. If you're in a situation like my wife loves to cook, if you're lucky enough to find somebody like that, you better be somebody who's willing to love to clean.
Yes.
Our deal has always been, oh, you're gonna sit there and cook all day? Great. Guess who's gonna clean? That's gonna be me because I like to eat. So if you're gonna do that, you got to be willing to pitch in and do the cleaning and do your part. But yeah, meal prep was a biggie. It saves us hours throughout the week because then, like for lunch, you're not sitting there and heating something up. I'm putting that in the microwave for 4 minutes and I'm ready to go.
Well, Brad, and that actually raises another thought, which is while you're doing templating for the week or scheduling for the week, come up with a couple of checklists that you can have around. And here's what I mean by that. So you know how Steve Jobs always used to wear the same outfit? And there's a couple people like that in tech that always wear the same, like what's his name, the Facebook jerk, that he always wears a hoodie, right?
Yeah.
I like that I said the Facebook jerk.
The Facebook jerk.
Anyway, but one of the reasons why certain kinds of personalities dress like that is that it cuts down on the mental time you have to waste every morning going, do I want the tan khakis with the blue shirt? Do I want the striped shirt with the shorts? Do I want these shoes with the and so while I don't prefer that kind of extreme life simplification, what I'm getting at is you might want to create some lists that say, if you have 15 minutes free, you can do X, Y, Z. If you have a half hour free, you can do X, Y, Z. And that way, when you know that no one's in the house for the next half hour, you go, oh, what should I do? What should I do? You just look at the list and you go, oh, I could be doing character sketches right now. Oh, I could be doing, early scripts, or I could be storyboarding things, whatever it is for you that you could do in a half an hour.
I can't co-sign that strongly enough because writing it down, see, here's the deal. I always used to think, well, I'll remember it when the time comes. I got to do this and I got to do that and I got to do this. And then all of a sudden you find yourself with that time on your hands and you're like, oh, I can't remember any of the stuff I was supposed to do. And by the time I remember it, the time has gone by and now I don't have time to do it anymore.
Right.
So writing that stuff down, super, super helpful, especially little 5-minute tasks that can be done anytime.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so the other one to that I would suggest is make a little nighttime schedule so that you're like, all right, dinner's done, dishes are in the sink. I've spent lovely time with my significant other or spouse or with my family or with my friends or whatever needs there. Okay, all my tasks for the day are done. Now I have an hour or two before bed. And then literally for that process, checklist out like all the things you can do. And if you can't finish a comic that night, then the next night you pick up right from point 4 on the checklist or something like that. You know what I mean? That way you don't feel like you're at least making forward progress every night that you have a little bit of free time to give to it. And I think that's a nice strategy for tackling it, because then you don't have to reinvent the wheel every night going, where was I? What was I doing? Oh, right. I was in the middle of sketching. Or wait, no, was I writing? I don't know. You know what I mean? Like it's all right there, bada bing, bada boom, and you're ready to go when you do have the free time.
And remember, menial tasks are your friend. Because menial tasks pretty much means that you're doing stuff with your body and you're not really engaged mentally. Sweeping the floor, vacuuming, doing dishes, stuff like that. That's body work and it's not brain work. You still got use of your brain. You can still brainstorm ideas. You can still, kind of creatively walk down different paths or do some basic writing or some, just idea creating while you're vacuuming and doing stuff like that. Don't miss the opportunity to take some of that time that you're using your body, but not so much your brain. And take that time back too.
Right. And then there's other little relationship tricks too, like do the dishes together, cook together, clean up together, talk about the week together, because those moments are the conversation will be just as fun and delightful and energetic while you're doing that as if you it's not perfect, but life is not perfect, and so do it together. You'll have together time, and it'll add to the overall enjoyment of the day. So I think that about as much as we can, Brad, puts a bow on that one, don't you think?
I think so. There's some things about this you could talk about it for weeks because there's so many little permutations. But at some point, the same themes tend to come up a little bit. It's a lot about time management, and it's a lot about just accepting a certain balance and accepting that sometimes your life is going to be a little bit off balance, and that's okay too. You'll get back to that balance, like what Dave was saying.
And what Brad was leading up to there too is also just be kind to yourself.
Yeah.
Sometimes life is going to grab you by the ear and you can only do so much. And so if you can't do anything for a couple of weeks, a couple of months, sometimes a couple of years, that's okay. You have, on average 70 to 80 years to get this done. And so there will come a day again. Life is not permanently in the moment that you're in. So do what you can and be kind to yourself. And when you do have those moments where you can cartoon and create, be kind to yourself and enjoy it. And I think, as both Brad and I would say, the comics will come as you give time to it. And it's okay if they can't always be given all the time you would like. That is the nature of life, and it's okay.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. But in the meantime, give yourself credit for one thing that you did very well this week. You were listening to ComicLab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
Your hosts have been Brad Guigar, Ziggy Junk Aficionado, and the editor of webcomics.com and cartoonist of Evil Inc. at evil-comic.com.
And my friend Dave Kellett, co-director of Stripped and cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com and Drive at drivecomic.com.
And the Comic Lab theme song is used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net. And this episode and all episodes was edited by the wonderful Matt Woodard at Woodsong Productions at www.woodsong.media.
Comic Lab is made possible by your support at patreon.com/comiclab, so we'll go ahead and say that twice. Patreon.com/comiclab.
Just imagine being that dog.